Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. We'd like to remind you to please keep your camera off and to keep your microphones muted. For best viewing, please use speaker view. Welcome to the Accokeek Foundation's presentation of Tobacco Talk Tuesdays. I am Shamika Berry, the Outreach Specialist and your moderator for this evening. The Accokeek Foundation is located in Piscataway Park within the traditional ancestral homelands of the Piscataway people, both past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and the people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We are humbled and honored to be able to carry on in this tradition. The Accokeek Foundation's mission is to cultivate passion for the natural and cultural heritage of Piscataway Park and commitment to stewardship and sustainability. I would like to now introduce one of our panelists and Accokeek board member, Rico Newman of the Choptico Band of the Piscataway people, to give us a welcome.
Wile Wilaku, Tuenama. O Gilang Kumokik, Ni Koyahose, Wenge, Chopticon, O Piscatawe, Camigo, Yakio, Kana Hagai. Good evening, friends and relatives. My name is Rico Newman. I'm an elder with the Choptico Band of the historic Piscataway Chiefdom, and I welcome you here to our homeland, the land between the points. And those that don't know, Piscataway Kanoi would be loosely translated as the people who live where waters blend below the rapids. We welcome you. Aho.
Thank you, Rico. November has been designated as National Native American Heritage Month. Maryland also recognizes American Indian Heritage Month, and in 2008, the Maryland legislature established American Indian Heritage Day as an official state holiday on the day after Thanksgiving. The day is meant to recognize and celebrate the contributions, heritage, and culture of the nearly 60,000 American Indians living in Maryland. Though truthfully, history should not be bound to a particular month. History should be shared year-round. In fact, if you consider an indigenous worldview that keeps in mind 7 generations before and 7 generations after, you carry history with you always. We also want to honor the heritage of Maryland's indigenous people and tribes, so we wanted to focus on a subject that tribes throughout this land revere. This evening, we present the 4th part of the Tobacco Talk series, Sacred Tobacco, a Native Plant. The Piscataway have been here for more than 10,000 years. They and other tribes throughout North and South America grew and appreciated the tobacco plant for its beauty and sacredness, not for profit. Story sharing has long been a tradition in indigenous cultures. Through oral traditions, observations of nature and understanding the world we live in were passed down through the generations. Here are a few. The Abenaki Indian tobacco story, Grasshopper and the Origin of Tobacco, which is a similar story from the Menominee tribe, and The Sacred Weed, a tobacco legend. Tobacco was considered a gift from the Creator in many indigenous cultures. According to some, tobacco smoke is a means of carrying the smoker's prayers to the Creator. Many tribes have shared stories about the origin of the first tobacco. In some North American tribes, tobacco was exclusively farmed by men, and women were forbidden from touching the growing plants, that is. Once it had been harvested, however, both men and women smoked. Tobacco leaves were smoked at rituals, ceremonies, and important social events. and also as medicine for any number of ailments. Tobacco is associated with relaxation, healing, and peace. In some tribes, particularly in North America, the pipes used for smoking tobacco are themselves considered highly sacred. In others, tobacco pipes are purely utilitarian or decorative objects. Tobacco is one of the herbs frequently included in medicinal bundles and is still popularly used as an offering or a gift today. Tonight's program has been developed in cooperation with the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian. We would like to thank Sean Turman of the Lakota Nation, who is the Assistant Director for Programs, and Glenn Burlak of the Lumbee Tribe, who is the Operational Support Specialist. In preparation for this presentation, Glenn introduced me to Chief Elisha Locklear of the Tuscarora Tribe of North Carolina. He is a World War II veteran whose family were tobacco sharecroppers in North Carolina. The three of us had a wonderful conversation via Zoom that I will share with you shortly. After the video, we will be joined by Dr. Cedric Woods of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. He is the director for the Institute for New England Native American Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and Rico Newman, who gave us our wonderful welcome, who is of the Choctaw Band of the Piscataway. He is the chairman for the Choctaw Band of Indians nonprofit organization, Maryland Indian Tourism Association, as well as the Choctaw's Historic Preservation Officer and teacher. And as mentioned before, he is a current board member of the Accokeek Foundation. A few weeks ago, I had the joy of meeting Chief Locklear and hearing his stories of growing up on a tobacco sharecropping farm in North Carolina. I will be playing the video in a minute of that conversation. It has been edited for time and content. The views expressed in the video are those of personal experiences and from the panelists and not advocated by the Accokeek Foundation. Part of our Tobacco Talk series, Tobacco Talk Tuesday series.
Yes.
And I have been working with Glenn very closely, and he told me all about you and said that you have such a vast knowledge of growing up around tobacco and with tobacco. And so I just wanted to take this time to meet you and just sit down and listen to your stories about tobacco, how you used it growing up or your family used it, or in today's society, we say the word tobacco and people think of the big tobacco companies and all of the health problems that it causes from commercial tobacco use. But the tobacco itself is a plant that grew naturally, and it has many purposes that people may not know about and they may not be aware of because of what they know from society and from modern day commercial usage. So I wanted to get your feedback and your experiences with how you and your family and those in your community have used tobacco in ways that are not traditional to mainstream society and communities, but perhaps you can enlighten us into the true nature and sacredness of the tobacco plant itself.
Well, tobacco began with the Native Americans began growing tobacco as an herb, and I noticed in the many of the Iroquoian cultural ceremonies that I'm associated with, there's something called a sunrise ceremony, tobacco burning at sunrise. It's kind of a offering to our Creator for the Thanksgiving for the tobacco, and that happens. Lots of Iroquoian people, when they have day-long ceremonies, they will start the day at sunrise with a tobacco burning, and anybody that's traditional people, they want to participate in that, they usually are welcome to do that. But I grew up on a sharecropper's farm down in North Carolina, and tobacco was a integral part. It was a critical part of our life as far as living, and being part of a family. My mother and father and 10 brothers and one sister. We had to work day and night pretty much in the summertime, spring and summertime, to help the family make a living. So we started I started about 12 years old on a place called the McNair Farms down south in North Carolina, Robeson County. These people owned several major pieces of land in the area, and they farmed probably around 100 acres of tobacco. And we helped pull the leaves off something called, I have a couple of notes here. Flue-cured tobacco was the staple in Robeson County for about 200 years. And people started raising flue-cured tobacco, I would imagine, around middle 1850s, around 1850, because when the Africans came over here, there was a lot of tobacco grown, cotton grown, and the more labor you had, the more tobacco you could farm. The more tobacco you could put on the market, and you could become wealthy growing a lot of tobacco. You could become wealthy growing a lot of cotton, and you had to have a lot of hand labor to grow tobacco or cotton. And I started at 12 years old on a place called McNair Farms. We got 30 cents an hour for 10 hours a day, and $15 a week for 5 days working in tobacco. There are several processes of dealing with tobacco. I don't know if you want to know about the how it was started as far as making the plant beds, making the fields, or working the fields physically, or what you were interested in. But I had made some notes about the different types of tobacco, and people in the mountains in North Carolina grow something called burley tobacco. People in eastern North Carolina grow something called flue-cured tobacco. The burley tobacco is a very it's an unusual tobacco because it don't have a lot of smell to it. But flue-cured tobacco is a sweeter tobacco. You mix burley and flue-cured tobacco and you make your cigarettes. And people in the Tuscarora Reservation at Niagara Falls in New York, person called Smokey Joe Anderson, he's got all the cigarettes and tobacco business on the Tuscarora Reserve, and he gets his tobacco from the people that own the North Carolina Motor Speedway in Charlotte. They have a huge amount of tobacco grown, and Smoking Joe buys all his tobacco for cigarette production from those people. And there's lots of bad reputation given to tobacco from people in the commercial industry, and then people wanted to get away from the commercial industry and stop people because of cancer and all these other things. We had a lot of people in the community, as they grew older, they would get sick from it. They had cancers in their mouth, they would lung cancer. In fact, a friend of mine now is in the hospital for lung cancer, and it's awful shape now. But he's around 90 years old, and he probably smoked 50, 60 years.
Wow.
Well, the Shmika, the burley is what happened, what we grow in Maryland. It's burley, and flu cured. And Mr. Elijah Locklear could talk more about this, but flu cured is cooked. So you cook it for like 3-4 days maybe, and the burley is what goes in your barn, and that goes in there for months. So that's air cured. So that's the big difference. One's cooked and one's air cured.
Oh, well, are there? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The burley, Glenn, if I might interject, the burley is, I said, was sort of a neutral flavored tobacco. And in order to give it a character, give it a better smell and a better taste, they take the flue cured and after it is cooked and grind it up and mix it together, and it gives it a better character, better aroma. I know this flue cured. When I was a kid, we were not allowed to have snuff and tobacco from the elders because they couldn't afford it. So we would sneak out into the barn after it was cured and get some and mix it with molasses and make good chewing tobacco.
Now, would you give it to the elders or would you keep that for yourself?
If we made it ourselves, we kind of kept it for ourselves. They usually have powdered tobacco called snuff. And the ground up tobacco, with chewing tobacco. They had 2 or 3 different kinds of chewing tobacco. And snuff is what I was introduced to at about 5 years old. My mother and father had it at home on the mantle over the fireplace. And we were allowed to get a teaspoon or something, maybe get a taste of it every once in a while, but not all the time.
Was there a specific reason why they allowed you to do it? Was it medicinal or part of a ceremony, or just because they were trying to calm you down?
Lots of times kids in the South, poor people's children would, and this would be true of Black, white, or Indian kids. They were barefoot. They'd go around barefoot, and they would get pinworms and hookworms and things in their feet, and it would get into their blood. And the people would give them a dose of turpentine or tobacco, let them chew some tobacco, spit it down their throat, and it would kill the worms that's already in their stomach.
Oh.
That was medicinal.
Wow. I had not heard of that before, but that's very, very interesting.
But turpentine, I'm sure you probably heard of turpentine.
Yes.
It's a Southern thing, but it would still give a child a drop of turpentine for every year of their age on a teaspoon of sugar. That turpentine would kill the worms inside the child's stomach, along with the tobacco.
Now, I've always heard don't eat or don't drink turpentine because, we use that to strip paint. So I'm from Louisiana originally, so I may have to ask my father and some of my great aunts if they knew about that and utilize some of that as well within the Creole community. That's very interesting.
One of the most guarded secrets, I think, in my mind and my lifestyle is when you talk to people in the medicine community, the doctors and people that prescribe medicine. When you tell them about sulfur, I'm sure you probably heard about sulfur. It was a Civil War medicine that lots of people used back then, but now when people have bone disorders, joint pain, and that kind of thing, sulfur is one of the medicines that will help with the joint pain, along with ginger and those type things.
Oh. Things they don't tell you.
Oh, yeah.
So besides the helping with the pinworms and other parasites that would get in the children's bloodstream, Were there any other uses or any other stories dealing with tobacco in your family that once you think back on them, they make you laugh or make you, give you
Well,
moments of pause or are happy, reflective memories?
my great grandfather's sister, her name was Love D. Brooks, and she smoked a pipe. She smoked a corncob pipe. And this woman was 90, in her mid 90s, I think, when she passed. And every picture I see of her, she has a pipe in her mouth. And this was a thing that I guess I identify with every time I see her, even with her sister, with her daughters. These daughters of hers would be in their mid to 50s or 60s, and she's there, right there with them with this pipe in her mouth, and with both of them.
Do you know what she made I understand the corn cob portion, but the portion leading from the corn cob itself, the stem.
We can, this tupelo that I use to make bread bowls, you could actually find a piece about the size of the thumb, about the size of your thumb. Mm-hmm. And there's a worm, this tupelo is called wormwood. The smaller it is, you could actually stick a piece of wire down the center of this piece of wood and trim it out on either both ends and stick it into the corncob pipe and use it for a stem.
Oh. I had heard about the clay pipes, and I've heard about corncob pipes my whole life, but I could never fathom what the stem was made from.
And they also have what we call cane, river cane. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Glenn knows about river cane, and but river cane could be used. You could still burn. You could heat a piece of wire up and run it through the center of this piece of river cane and make your pipe stem from that.
How long would the corncob portion last without it burning through?
Well, it probably lasts a season or two anyway. And if you doesn't put a lot of fire in it, a lot of them wouldn't put a lot of fire in it. They smoke it kind of slow, just enough to keep the smoke going. It would probably last 2 or 3 seasons.
Oh,
before you had to trade it out.
Well, I'm sure there was plenty of corn lying around, so they were never for want of a corncob pipe.
And there was also lots of river mud, the mud down here that they make clay out of. There's a lot of that, and they could make their own pipes out of clay too.
Oh. Did you ever share any of your tobacco knowledge when you were serving in the wars?
Well, I think the only time I did about six years altogether in the military, and European theater behind the Iron Curtain and places like this, but they saw me using tobacco as far as chewing. You don't get an opportunity to do a lot of smoking in the military, but most people that do it, they usually chew it.
Oh.
Either powdered tobacco or ground tobacco, chewing.
Glenn, did you have anything else that you wanted to add or keep out there?
I actually, growing up, I was young, and we'd go down to Granddaddy's, and Mr. Locklear knows the family where the Grahams were from, but he would grow, and there was so much pride in good-looking tobacco, and a lot of talking too. And I remember going to the auction, and you didn't want to be the guy that had not so good-looking tobacco, because you'll be like, "Oh, let's pray for him, because look how that tobacco is." But my granddaddy took a lot of pride in his tobacco, and it was a big honor. So there was definitely a shift in tobacco. But when I was a little boy, we were super proud that Granddaddy grew pretty tobacco. you know.
Well, you know, in those days, you actually got more money for the good-looking tobacco. But as time went on, before they got rid of the quotas and that kind of thing, they actually started taking any kind of whatever it looked like tobacco, and bring it in sheets. They would put it in sheets and tie it up like a barrel of trash or something.
Oh.
And it actually went from the most beautiful piece of tobacco in the community to they would take anything and sheet it up and give you the same price for everything.
Now, were there certain techniques or methods that your family used, Chief, or that your grandfather used, Glenn, in reference to making sure that the tobacco was the prettiest?
Well, you want to go ahead, Glenn, or you want me to go?
My granddaddy and the family, cousins and all that, they, you know, the elders, they always just said, raising tobacco is about the same as raising children. If you don't put the effort into it, you ain't got much. So he took care of his tobacco every day, and he took care of the kids too. So I know it's a lot of hard work, and
Yes.
he wouldn't let us touch it. That's for sure.
Oh.
We could play in the watermelon fields and pick watermelon, but don't touch that tobacco.
We would grade it when we cured tobacco and got it out of the barn, take it out of the barn. We would grade it, and we had about 3, sometimes 4 different grades. The prettiest, and then the next to the prettiest, and then to start to get to where it was kind of trashy. And we would take the best looking tobacco we had, and like you said about going to the market, the most beautiful tobacco you had is what brought the best price.
Were there any challenges or any methods that you found or that your families found that would prevent it from going bad faster, that maybe the neighbors or other people in the community hadn't picked up on?
Well, the tobacco in the field, when it started curing, when it started ripening, it turned yellow. It kind of a little bit, not quite as yellow as your top, but it was ready then to be pulled off the stalk and put into the barn. And we would leave it in the barn for at least a day or 2 and let it finish yellowing up.
Oh.
That was my VA clinic calling in. I'm sorry.
I understand.
And he's talking about when you down there, you pull the leaves up in your barn, they take the whole stalk and they spear it and hang it up. That's the difference. But Mr. Locklear would know more about that.
Oh.
As far as yellowing, when we put in what would happen, are you familiar with have you ever seen a tobacco stick, Glenn?
Yeah, I got some around here.
Okay. If Miss Berry had a tobacco stick and had a person standing at one end of it and the other end stuck into the wall, you would have get yourself a roll of cotton twine. And they would put a loop on the one end of the stick, and one woman standing down here, and we'd have 2 children, one on each side of this lady. She's going to put this tobacco on a stick and get it ready to put into the barn to cure it. So what you would do would get about 3 leaves in each hand, and she would loop a string around it on either side of the stick until she got all the way to the end of the stick, and it would look like a rose petal almost. If you lifted the stick up,
Oh.
The tobacco leaves are hung on the end of the stalk, the stick, all the way out, and the bottom of it looks like a green rose petal because it would all be fluffed out at the bottom and tied to the stick at the top. And once you got that done, you put all these sticks inside the barn and put it on something called tiers. We had tiers inside the barn where pieces of steel poles up there where you hook the lay the cup sticks out on them, and we would have about 100 sticks of tobacco in each section of the barn. And that afternoon, once we got through putting the barn back into the barn, we'd put a little bit of heat in it. And it would start more, you'd have more brightening process, more of the yellowing process. And then in about 2 days, you would run the heat up a little higher in the barn, and it would cook the leaf of the tobacco. The leaf is thinner than the stem, so you cook the leaf first, and then you raise the heat of about 180 degrees, and you would cook the stem, get the moisture out of the stem, and then the tobacco is ready to take out of the barn and start getting it ready for the process of marketing. In fact,
Thank you, Chief, and thank you, Glenn. The rest of the video talked about marketing, but I wanted to bring in the rest of our panelists and talk to Rico and Cedric and Glenn, and we are happy to see that Chief has joined us as well to talk about your experiences and your family's experiences with tobacco, particularly if you have anything to share about any tobacco pipes that your families used, because Chief was referencing the corncob pipe that was used in his family. Rico, if you wanted to start first.
The only occasion I know of, or the person I know of that imbibed in a corncob pipe was my dad's mother, Sarah. She was a corncob pipe smoker. And I understand there was some others on my mother's side who also imbibed in the use of the corncob pipe. It's very telling to hear how tobacco was treated and how it was done in Carolinas as opposed to how it was done up here in Maryland. Quite a contrary difference. Tobacco was never cured in that fashion. As a kid, we always went down when the tobacco was at a certain size, and our job as kids was to go through there and pull off all of those big green worms, which would rear back like they wanted to fight you. And you know, we would have a ball taking them off and then trying to find the girls in there to chase them or use them as bait for fishing. But that was about the only extent that our uncles would allow us to be bothered with the tobacco until it was time for it to be brought in. As like you said, the way our tobacco was done, they would chop it, lay it out in the field. It would stay there for a day, and then it was gathered, brought in, laid out in the barn the way it would do some cure there. Then it would be speared and taken up in the lofts and hung for it to dry. We were always brought into the barn just when they were starting to take it off the floor of the barn to hang it, because our job was to run through there and scare all of the black snakes out of the barn. For some reason, they always wanted to hide under the tobacco. But you know, the tobacco industry in Maryland went through a dramatic change between the time that my grandfather, who started sharecropping himself in 1889 at the young tender age of 14 or 15. He rented property from a gentleman near St. Ignatius Church down on Chapel Ford Road. And he did that for up and all into his adult life, and met his would be his wife, who lived next door, who was the daughter of another sharecropper down in Charles County, Maryland. One of the dramatic changes that happened with some of the native farmers down in that region, the Port Tobacco, which a lot of people are familiar with, it was a port where tobacco was being shipped out. But most of the farmers with large estates didn't live on that side of the county. They lived around the Plater and other areas further inland because they had to get more land that was productive, because tobacco sucks all of the nutrients out of the ground. So they had to constantly move to get more fertile ground to grow the crop. And they wound up on the other side of La Plata. So they moved the railhead from Port Tobacco to La Plata. So that left all of the sharecroppers and those who had small plots of land with a problem of trying to get their tobacco to market. So many of the native farmers on that side had to wind up supplementing their income by taking jobs. The second generation, my uncles that did tobacco farming, all of them had day jobs, as they call it. They would get off from work. Most of them were construction workers or truck drivers. They would get off early enough that they would then run home and jump on the tractor or behind a mule anyhow and start plowing and planting. Quite an ordeal for people to go through. But I only recall going to one tobacco auction, and as I thought about it in later years, I was able to see some of the drama that was going on there. They had these round pallets that you had to put samples of your tobacco on. And the guy would come through and they would look at it, they would feel it, rub it, and they would judge it, grade it. And then they would put a sign on it with numbers. And then the auctioneer would start going through his, but instead of like the yodeling or whatever it is they do. And I always noticed that all the tobacco was sold off before they ever got over to the section where my uncles had their tobacco. So, they got the leavings, the last of anything. And of course, the price that they got for their product was below what everyone else got. Today, Maryland basically does no tobacco farming. The only ones that are doing any of it are the Mennonites and the Quakers. And collectively, they are planting somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 acres or less. And they have to have their product trucked all the way to Pennsylvania to have it processed. Not even to Virginia or to the Carolinas. I guess Pennsylvania is closer. But that's what has happened with the tobacco industry in Maryland. All of the farmers that were raising tobacco in Maryland were basically bought out, not out of their land, but they were paid to stop growing tobacco. By 2000, 2001, you could grow tobacco for your personal use, but not for commercial use. Because if you were growing it, you were bought out. And you just couldn't continue to grow tobacco commercially. I never got around to any tobacco being grown again, once I reached adulthood and later on in life when I went to work for the National Museum of the American Indian. And I guess, horticulturist, botanist, or Christine had grown a stand of tobacco on the east side of the museum. And I was kind of amazed. I'd never seen this done before. That when they decided to take that crop down, the Lumbee came up and harvested tobacco in their traditional way of harvesting tobacco, something I had never seen before. To strip the stalks of the leaves and stack them, and they were trucked down to Carolina to be kiln dried. I'd never heard of that. I was always used to tobacco being speared and hung in a barn with the sides being able to swing open so air could circulate and to air cure the tobacco. plus the type of tobacco that they grew. After speaking with Christine, she was able to get a strain of Tabac, or pure native tobacco, from the Department of Agriculture out in Greenbelt. And she grew that. And we were able to take that crop out to, ultimately, we were able to take that crop out to Accokeek to have it hung in the barn. As I remember, the young man who was working there then, Matt Mattingly, he was the one that climbed up in the loftus and hung the tobacco. Because originally we were going to take the tobacco down to one of my cousins' farm in Issue, Maryland, because he had an empty barn. But the brain power on the 5th floor said it's not going to happen. We can't have anybody on the clock going anywhere, climbing up 40 feet off the ground, hanging tobacco. Too much liability. So we wound up with that tobacco going to Accokeek after going through writing up several papers to come to some meeting of the minds as to how that was going to happen, arranging a relationship between the Smithsonian, MAI, and Accokeek was finally done. We were able to bring the tobacco down there and to get it done. I think it was like 9 staff members from the museum, Glenn included, Dennis Zotai, and we even had one Mayan young lady to come down and help with the tobacco. And she had her own way of dealing with tobacco. So the way tobacco was treated would be different depending on the cultural group you're dealing with and their worldview or their way of dealing with tobacco. She had her own way of dealing with it. You talked about the lower leaves. I remember they would always take the lower leaves off of the standing plants if they were starting to turn yellow or mellowing. And they would cut those off and tie them together in what you call hands. And they would hang those separately and keep those for their own personal use. The stalks that went up were for sale. That was the cash product. But you know, it's an interesting thing to do. I think the last time I was down at Accokeek, I think the guy's name was Love. I don't think it was Loveless. He was planting tobacco, and I brought my great-grandson down and showed him how tobacco is planted, how it's spaced out and why it's spaced out and why it's put in hills and why there wasn't a plow going through the field. So it was done in the old way. And it was something that I was glad that I was able to pass on to the next generation, because it was my great-grandson. So he's had that experience, and hopefully it's something that he'll be able to retain and be able to tell his grandchildren or great-grandchildren.
Yes, those 7 generations before, the 7 generations after.
So, you know, but the tobacco, one of the reasons tobacco was being grown at the museum for it to be cured. And what happened from that, we had the people down in the basement to build these acrylic containers. And there was one out where I think Glenn took that one out to Suitland. And there was one at the Resource Center on the 3rd floor of the museum where we kept the tobacco after it cured. And we got bags that were made from cloth that wasn't dyed, wasn't treated, etc. And that's the other thing. The tobacco that was grown outside the museum, no poisons, no chemicals, no fertilizers, nothing could be put on that tobacco, because when you start distributing it to visitors coming in from tribes, their ambassadors, their chiefs, their leaders, when they come in and you gift them that tobacco, you don't give them commercial tobacco. And I think early on you showed a thing, tobacco wasn't to be sold. It was gifted to them as a token of their having come here. And when I left the museum, it was still going strong. I don't know whether it is today. The last stand of tobacco that I helped with there was a stand that Glenn had grown himself out at not Accokeek, at Suitland, on the side of the storage units out there, and took that down and had it shipped down to Accokeek and hung, which reminds me of Glenn with that baby copperhead snake down in that drain. You gotta watch those lumbies.
Cedric, do you have any stories of chasing snakes out of tobacco or working with tobacco pipes yourself?
Well, not pipes, Shamika, but I actually recall running out of a tobacco field to get away from snakes because as Rico and Mr. Elisha and Glenn have discussed, those lower leaves are quite large and all kinds of stuff can hide up under those.
Yeah.
And I've had the same experience in a cucumber field as well. So you always had to watch where you stepped and what you grabbed because it may not be what you were looking for. But I did have experiences there. And one of the things too, looking at the images of the tobacco that's grown in Maryland and the Carolinas versus the traditional tobacco that all of our shared ancestors, whether it's Mr. Elisha, Mr. Rico, or my cousin Glenn, the plants that we grew were called, well, rustica is the Latin name of it, but it's much smaller, and the English thought it was very bitter. They didn't care for it much at all. So very quickly, John Rolfe is credited with bringing in what they call Spanish tobacco, which is actually just traditional tobacco from other native peoples from down in South America and the Caribbean. And that is the ancestor of what's called Virginia brightleaf tobacco. Our peoples continued, other Eastern native peoples, in cultivating rustica, but that's not the commercial tobacco that my family, Mr. Elisha's family, Glenn's family, Rico's family grew up growing and being involved very heavily in large scale agricultural production. That tobacco is still grown, still shared in ritual spaces, but not part of the commercial endeavors. And Shamika, I really appreciate your slides you showed when you started contextualizing tobacco initially being of huge interest to Europeans as a medicinal crop, as an herb, because for Europeans, they weren't just interested in land, but they were interested in all the plants, all the things like sassafras, ginseng, golden seal, that our indigenous ancestors knew the proper place and role for. And so that was something that we still use in non-commercial ways, that we still grow that traditional strain of Eastern tobacco. And obviously the commercial tobacco is still grown, much less so, but across the American South as well. I also appreciate my relative, Mr. Elisha, talking about the very large families. For sharecroppers, it was a necessity. One of my dad's cousins said the first question they would ask, he went with his father one time to one of these large white landowners, and he asked him how many kids he had. And the correct answer was always more than 8. If you had less than 8 kids, you didn't get hired. So that's a reason why there are so many of us down there in Robeson County. We had our own labor program taking place, if you will.
I can imagine that was very helpful. Rico had me laughing talking about the hornworms. And I find it interesting that you were running out of the field because of snakes, and I ran out of the fields of Accokeek the first time I saw a hornworm because it terrified me so badly. For it to be as small and harmless as it is to humans, it is a frightful looking insect, caterpillar, worm that never dies, whatever you choose to call it, but it's very unpleasant. And if you've never seen a hornworm, be glad about it. Now, with your educational background and what you teach, do you cover the different types of pipes that are used, or do you cover any of the disparity with the tobacco sales between Indians and the Europeans?
Sure. I don't focus much on the material culture in terms of pipe production, although there's a huge range of variability. As Mr. Elisha was talking about, corncob pipes, kaolin pipes, which are trade pipes, native peoples making, manufacturing their own clay, soapstone, catlinite, other types of pipes across the Americas, smoking tubes, lots of different ways that tobacco was used or offered into sacred fires, as he was referencing earlier, and still is happening today. It's a continual aspect and practice of Native peoples. And another very important thing, which I do talk about very explicitly, is the importance of tobacco as a ritual gift and its role in diplomacy. In the 18th century, Thomas Jefferson's describing that wampum and tobacco were the two things that you must have if you're going to engage in any diplomacy with Native peoples. So when the Lewis and Clark expedition goes west, they have pounds and pounds and pounds of tobacco to give as an appropriate protocol with these indigenous communities they encounter. No surprise, they don't bring enough, they run out. And the Native peoples are saying, well, you're not treating us correctly because these are our expectations as to how this exchange is to take place. And so if I would go visit my older relatives, Mr. Rico or Mr. Elisha, I would bring traditional tobacco to them as a show of respect. And so those are things that I certainly talk about and discuss as part of the courses I teach in Native American Indigenous Studies.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your feedback and your recollections. And Rico, I appreciate your recollections and your stories. We also have Chief Locklear present with us, as well as Glenn. Wanted to offer the opportunity for them to join in and speak. And if any of the participants have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And if we are unable to get to them, they will be answered via email. Chief Locklear, did you want to say anything?
Unmute my mic. I'm unmuted.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm just wanted to say thank you to Cedric, and it's been some time since I've seen him, so hoping and praying that he's been doing good. I hear great things about what he's doing way up north, and I'm honored to be involved in this situation, this tobacco thing with the Accokeek and Miss Barry, Dr. Woods. I'm sorry, bless your heart. But it's good, so good to see you, and it's good to be involved. And I appreciate being asked, and I'm hoping that it might not be the last time.
It most certainly will not be the last time. I am appreciative of all of our panelists for joining us, and for Glenn for putting a lot of this together and introducing me to Chief Locklear and bringing his cousin Cedric, Dr. Woods, on board. And thank you, Rico, as our board member and resident expert in tobacco and the history of it. I appreciate all of you coming and being a part of this presentation.
And if I could, I wanted to interject a spot idea, a word or two. I believe Rico, I have some relatives. Are you familiar with the Tayaks?
Oh yes, yes, sir.
Okay. Turkey Tayak was married to my mother's first cousin.
Whoa. Yeah, we've heard a lot about him down south.
Oh yeah. Glad to meet you. And I enjoyed hearing your presentation. Thank you.
Sir. Yours too.
Well, we have a few moments left, and there is a question in the chat from Kaylin, one of our associates here at the Accokeek Foundation. And she wants to know if any of your families faced issues with the flea beetle. And if so, how did you deal with that pest eating your tobacco as it was starting to grow?
We faced with issues with what?
The flea beetle, if you had any instances where the flea beetle would attack your tobacco as seedlings, or if you only dealt with the hornworm attacking it as an older plant.
I think we had the beetles in fig bushes and grapevines and things like that, but we never dealt with it a lot with tobacco. The hornworm was the one pest that we dealt with a lot about all my life in the tobacco fields. But wherever we could lay hands on it, we took him to the river.
And used them as bait, I understand.
The only beetle that I remember I having to deal with was the Japanese beetle. And I mean, you know, when I was a kid, these things were as big as a $50. We used to tie cords on their legs and make them fly around our heads like a airplane and hear them buzz. And of course, you know, we would take them off of any plants that they might be on, and again, use them for bait. So, but no, other than the Japanese beetle, I don't remember us having to pull any insects off of the plants, other than that worm.
There's another question. Thank you. There's another question. How did you prevent suckering after topping?
The more traditional tobacco is, the older it goes back, the more suckers you're going to have on it. As you get more modern, and I guess what is it we call it when we crossbreed tobacco and things like that, we try to grow out the suckering. I noticed that it does with corn as well. Old traditional corn I have planted from the Niagara Falls people. They have the traditional corn, and every spot along the stalk where there's a joint, there's a sucker grows on the corn. So you have to pull all those things off. You had to sucker the corn to actually raise corn on the old traditional corn. And the more traditional tobacco is, the more suckering you have to do. And with the broadleaf Hicks tobacco we used on commercial farming tobacco, there was a lot of suckering in it, but they got to where they could use a certain chemical to kill the sucker when it started growing on the top of the leaf.
Ah, thank you. There are two other questions. Casey Harlow wants to know, who did you sell your tobacco to? And there's a question for, do you plant cover crops to mitigate soil depletion? And if so, which ones?
Did I say something about who you plant to sow your tobacco to?
Yes, sir, please do.
Does anybody remember going north through Richmond, Virginia, and seeing all those big cigarette signs on the left along the Interstate 95 going into Richmond?
Yes, sir.
Those are the tobacco companies that buy tobacco down south, and they buy Turkish tobacco, Turkish blended tobacco, and mix it with flue cured, as Glenn said earlier. Also the burley flue cured, and the tobacco from the people over at the racetrack in Charlotte, that Iroquois people up north buy tobacco from, they have gone to buying out farmers down south, and a lot of farmers have lost their acreages of tobacco. And I think you mentioned it, my brother, with the Piscataway people. They bought acreages out down south, and a lot of people lost the contracts to sell tobacco. And so a lot of these companies in America that sold tobacco for 100 years, they've gone completely out of business.
Hmm.
Yeah, on that question about cover crops, cover crops is a relatively recent process. If you go back far enough, our people would raise tobacco in one field, and I might have mentioned earlier, tobacco depletes all the nutrients out of the soil very quickly. You know, after a couple of years of crops, you got to move it someplace else because you're not going to get a suitable crop if you keep putting it in the same field. And this was before they came up with nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to replace in the field. So you had to rotate your fields. And of course, once the colonials came in, they felt like, okay, you weren't using this field, so I'm taking it. So you ran out of space to rotate your fields. And pretty soon, it started showing in the importance of your crops. And you weren't able to let a field go fallow, because if you did, somebody will come in and take it from you. So the process of letting a field go fallow and you move to another field that had been enriched because you let it grow back naturally, that pretty much went out, because now they came in with artificial fertilizers or chemicals to put on the ground where you can grow one crop right after the other and just keep it going by introducing chemical fertilizer into the ground rather than waiting for the ground to recover so that you could grow a crop naturally. So that now they use a couple crops. I'm amazed. I go through some, especially down in Virginia, they're growing this short type of sugar cane in the fields. And once it's grown, then they go in and plow it under, and that will put nutrients back into their field. So they've got new ways now of putting cover crops out there that they can turn under that will re-enrich the soil so they can put another crop in, whether they're doing soybeans or most of them aren't doing tobacco anymore, feed corn, you know, so they use a cover crop so they don't have to leave a field go fallow for too long before they can replant it.
Thank you. Well, this has been wonderful, and it is now 8:04, and I'm sure that we would all love to just continue chatting all evening, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so I just thank you all again for your participation in today's presentation.
Mama Lizzo.
For the plant to be sacred, it cannot be sold. Tobacco is a beautifully complex plant. It is medicinal, a means of communication with our ancestors, and a gift shared during times of sacred ceremonies and celebration. It can be at once unifying and divisive, but the one thing it cannot be is forgotten. Thank you all for participating in this evening's presentation of Sacred Tobacco. Thanks again to the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian for their support in developing this program. Thank you, Glenn, Cedric, Rico, and Chief Locklear for your participation in the panel. And thank you, Deanna, for your support with the chat. All of you participants will receive an email in the next day or so with a list of resources as well as a survey. We ask that you would please share your thoughts, because knowing the types of programs you are interested in will help us prepare for presentations in the upcoming year. Please follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And coming soon, Although we can't gather together around the bonfire on the farm for Winter's Eve this year, we'd like to bring a little piece of the farm to your hearth and home. You can pre-order a do-it-yourself Piscataway Park wreath kit for a fun holiday activity you can do at home. Each kit will include a handmade wreath base, greenery, and pine cones from the farm, Hog Island wool ornaments, and a handmade bow. You can order your kit online by December 3rd and then pick it up in the park on December 5th between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. All proceeds from wreath sales will support the Accokeek Foundation's educational programs and land conservation work in Piscataway Park. We also have Farm Tour Fridays from now until December 11th at 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. These are in-person tours that require pre-registration and social distance guidelines. You can sign up for those tours online at our newly updated website, www.accokeek.org. Your participation in this evening's presentation is greatly appreciated. We hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.